The wind had teeth, and it was chewing on the edges of Wyoming. Luke Hale felt it on the back of his neck, a sharp, promising bite that spoke of a long, hard winter. The sky was the color of a fresh bruise, low and heavy, pressing down on the gray sagebrush flats. Beside him, on the wagon bench, his 8-year-old son, Eli, sat straight, his small hands tucked under his thighs for warmth. He was a quiet boy, had been for the 2 years since his mother was buried. He had Luke's dark eyes, eyes that watched everything and said little. Luke pulled the brim of his hat lower. He was a man carved from the same hard land he rode through, all angles and quiet strength. The lines around his mouth were not from smiling. Grief had settled on him like alkali dust, coating everything, and he had long since stopped trying to wipe it away. He existed for one reason, and that reason sat beside him, watching the ears of the 2 mules pulling their wagon toward the collection of raw lumber buildings they called a town. They needed supplies. The list was short, burned into his memory: flour, kerosene, salt, and medicine. 4 things to stand between them and the white death that would soon swallow their remote cabin. 4 things that required this ride, this brief, hated brush with other people. The town of Garrison was hunkered down, bracing for the same storm Luke fled. Thin tendrils of smoke rose from stovepipes, dissolving instantly in the wind. There were no children playing in the single, muddy street, no women gossiping on the boardwalk, just a few men, their shoulders hunched inside thick coats, who watched the wagon rattle past. Luke Hale's arrival always caused a stir, though it was a silent one. He felt their eyes. He always did. The women peered from behind curtains at the mercantile, their faces soft with a pity he despised. The men outside the saloon stopped talking, their gazes a mixture of respect and distance. He was a fixture of their local lore, the man who had lost his wife, Sarah, to the bloody sheets of childbirth, the man who had stayed out in the high lonesome, raising his boy alone, a hermit touched by tragedy. They left him be, and for that he was grateful. But their quiet, knowing glances were a burden, another weight to carry with the salt and the flour. He pulled the mules to a stop in front of Croft's mercantile. "Stay," he said to Eli. The boy nodded, his eyes fixed on the saloon doors, as if expecting a monster to emerge. Luke swung down, his movements economical. He was not a large man, but he was solid, and he moved with the deadly quiet of someone who spent most of his time alone. The boardwalk planks groaned under his boots. Inside, the mercantile smelled of cured tobacco, burlap, and sharp cheddar. Silas Croft, a man whose spine had bent under the weight of his inventory, polished the counter with a gray rag. "Mr. Hale," he said, his voice neutral. "Come for the winter load?" "Aye," Luke said. His voice was rough, like stones dragging. 2 sacks of flour, 50 pounds each, kerosene, 5 tins, the block of salt, and your medicine box, the one with the laudanum." Croft nodded, turning to his shelves. "Heard the wolves are bad this season, up near your range. They're always bad." Luke laid a few coins on the counter. He did not want to talk about wolves. He did not want to talk. Croft gathered the items, his movement slow. He was counting in his head, his lips moving. Luke's gaze drifted past him, through the grimy window, to the street. He watched Eli, who was now tracing a pattern in the frost on the wagon's side. The boy was small, too small for this land. Sarah had been small. "That'll be—" Croft started, but was interrupted. The mercantile door flew open, banging against a barrel of pickles. Sheriff Brody filled the doorway, his face red from the cold and some inner frustration. He was a thick man, important in his own mind. "Silas," he boomed, not bothering to nod at Luke. "You seen a girl? Ran right past here. Thin thing. Looked half mad." Croft shook his head, his hands pausing on a tin of kerosene. "Ain't seen nobody but Mr. Hale, sheriff. Mad how?" "Mad like a thief," Brody snapped. He saw Luke then, and his expression shifted, softening just a fraction. The official pity. "Hale, afternoon." Luke nodded once. "She stole bread, right off the cooling rack behind the kitchen," Brody complained, gesturing vaguely. "A whole loaf. Just grabbed it and ran, like a coyote." Luke's gaze flickered to the building across the street. The church. Its paint was peeling in long, sun-scorched strips, and the small steeple leaned, as if tired of praising a sky so empty. The doors were slightly ajar, rattling in the wind. He had heard something. He realized, a moment before Brody burst in, not a rattle, a scrape. "Well, she ain't in here," Croft said, pushing the last tin toward Luke. "If you see her, hail, you holler," Brody ordered, more to the air than to Luke. "She's a vagrant. Can't have vagrants when the snow flies. Bad for morale." He stomped back out, his spurs ringing with self-importance. Luke paid his bill, his mind on the church. He gathered the first sack of flour, hoisting the 50 pounds to his shoulder as if it were nothing. He carried it to the wagon. "Pa?" Eli asked, his small voice tight. "It's nothing. Eli, sheriff's just blowing smoke." He loaded the flour, then the salt block, then the kerosene. He told Eli to stow the tins under the tarp. As the boy worked, Luke walked back across the street, his boots silent in the mud. He didn't go back to the mercantile for the medicine box. He went to the church. The wind sang through the broken slats. The place smelled of mouse droppings, dead leaves, and something else, something human. Fear. He pushed the door open. It scraped on the rough floor. Dust motes danced in the thin, gray light that filtered through the cracked, colored glass. The pews were covered in bird droppings. It was a place God had clearly abandoned. "Hello?" he called. His voice was swallowed by the emptiness. Then he heard it, a small, hitched breath, a rustle of fabric. It came from the front, from behind the rough-hewn altar. Luke walked down the aisle, his hand resting on the butt of the pistol at his hip. He was not a man who startled, but he was a man who prepared. He stepped around the altar. She was huddled there, pressed into the corner like a hunted animal. For a moment, his mind couldn't make sense of what he saw. It was a woman or a girl. He couldn't tell, and she was wearing a wedding dress. The dress was fine, or had been. White silk and lace, now ripped at the seams, stained with mud and something darker. She was a skeleton draped in filthy satin. Her hair was a matted tangle of blonde and brown, stuck to her face with dirt and tears. Her hands were raw, her fingernails broken. But it was her eyes that held him. They were vast, blue, and so filled with terror that there was no room for anything else. When she saw him, a sound broke from her, a thin, dry sob. She pressed herself harder into the wall, her entire body shaking so violently he could hear her teeth chatter. "Please," she whispered. The word was broken, breathless. "Please have mercy. Don't hurt me." Luke stood frozen for a beat. He had seen starved cattle, trapped coyotes, men broken by the land. He had never seen this. His first thought was of Eli. This was a trouble he did not need. He should turn, fetch the sheriff, and be on his way home. But he didn't move. He saw the way she cringed, her arms coming up to protect her head, as if she was used to being struck. He saw the raw, red grooves on her wrists, as if she had been bound. He slowly took his hand from his gun and held it up, palm out. "I'm not the sheriff," he said. Her eyes darted to the door, then back to him. "He's looking for me. I took it, the bread, but I was so hungry. I'm not a thief, I haven't eaten in days. Please, sir." She was rambling, the words tumbling over each other. "I'll give it back. I didn't mean... Oh, God, he's going to take me back." The last words were a wail of pure animal panic. "Back where?" Luke asked, his voice quiet, not wanting to spook her further. "To them!" she cried, and the word was so full of dread it made the cold air in the church drop even lower. "Please, I can't. I'd rather die. I'd rather you shoot me right here. Just don't let them take me." Luke studied her. She wasn't mad. She was terrified. And she was starving. The bread was an excuse. The sheriff was a complication. The real fear was them. He didn't ask who, he didn't ask what. He had seen enough of the world to know that some questions were better left alone. He saw a creature in a trap, and his first instinct, the one buried under 2 years of hard grief, was not to walk away. He unhooked his canteen from his belt and held it out. She flinched. "Water," he said, her eyes fixed on it. She crawled forward a few inches, like a cautious animal, and snatched it from him. Her hands shook so badly she could barely get it to her mouth. She drank, choked, and drank again, the water spilling down her chin and onto the filthy bodice of the dress. Luke reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the piece of hardtack and jerky he kept for himself. He held that out, too. She finished the water and looked at the food. This time, she didn't snatch. She looked up at him, her blue eyes swimming with a desperate, heartbreaking question. He gave a short nod. She took the food and devoured it, stuffing it into her mouth with her fingers. Her eyes squeezed shut as if in pain. He had seen his dog eat this way once, after being lost for a week. When she was done, she wiped her mouth with the back of her raw hand, leaving a streak of mud. The shaking had eased, replaced by a deep exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered. She tried to push herself up, to stand, but her legs buckled. She was lighter than a sack of feed. Luke sighed. It was a sound of deep resignation. He had a son in the wagon. He had a winter to survive. He did not have room for this. He bent down. "Can you walk?" I think so." He slid one arm under her back and the other under her knees. She weighed nothing. She stiffened in his arms, her body rigid with a new fear, but she was too weak to fight. She just closed her eyes, her face pale as death. "What's your name?" he asked, walking toward the door. "Anna," she whispered against his coat. He carried her out into the failing light. The wind hit them, and she burrowed her face into his chest. A small, instinctive movement. Eli was standing in the wagon bed, his eyes wide. "Pa? It's all right. Eli, she's sick." Luke gently deposited her in the back of the wagon, among the sacks of flour. She immediately curled into a ball, her small body dwarfed by the supplies. "Please," she whispered again, her voice frantic as she clutched at his sleeve. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Please don't take me to the sheriff. He'll give me back to them. I'll do anything. I'll work. I can cook. I can clean. Just, please." Luke looked down at her. He thought of his cabin, of the empty chair opposite his at the table, of the long, silent nights. He thought of the wolves, and of all the ways this world could tear a person apart. He said nothing. He pulled the heavy canvas tarp over her, hiding her from view. "Stay quiet," he commanded. He went back into the mercantile. Croft was waiting with the small wooden medicine box. "Forget something?" Croft asked. "Medicine," Luke said. He took the box, paid the last of the coin, and walked out. He climbed onto the wagon bench. Eli looked at the lump in the back, then at his father. The boy knew not to ask. Luke clicked his tongue, and the mules strained, pulling the heavy wagon into a slow turn. They headed for the north edge of town. They were almost clear when he saw them. Sheriff Brody was standing by the livery, talking to 2 men. One was a stranger, dressed in a fine black suit, with a silver-topped cane and a look of cold impatience. The other was a rough-looking hand, wearing a low-slung pistol and a greasy duster. Their horses were lathered, as if they'd ridden hard. Brody saw the wagon and raised a hand. "Hale, hold up a moment." Luke pulled the mules to a stop. He kept his hands on the reins. "This here is Mr. Gable," Brody said, puffing his chest out. Important to be seen with a man in such a fine suit. "He's looking for some property. That girl I was hunting. Seems she belongs to him." "Mr." Gable stepped forward, his boots clicking on the hard-packed earth. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, and just as cold. "She is not a girl, Sheriff," Gable said, his voice smooth and educated. "She is a payment, a contract, signed and sealed. She ran off this morning from our camp east of here." He looked up at Luke, his gaze sharp and assessing. "You've been in town, cowboy. You see a woman in a wedding dress? Filthy, scared. Looks like a runaway bride, which is precisely what she is. Luke felt a small movement from under the tarp behind him. He kept his eyes on Gable. "Just seen Mr. Croft and my boy," he said, his voice flat. "Headed home. Snow's coming." Gable smiled, but it was just a baring of teeth. "She is valuable. Stolen goods. There's a $50 reward for her return. No questions asked." $50. Brody breathed, his eyes wide. "I ain't seen her," Luke said. His hands tightened on the reins. Gable stared at him for a long, heavy second. He looked at the wagon bed, at the carefully tied-down tarp. He looked at Eli, who stared back with his father's unnerving stillness. A man alone, with a boy, Gable mused, tapping his cane against his boot. "It's a hard life. $50 would make it easier." Luke said nothing. He just waited. The wind howled between the buildings, throwing ice crystals that stung his face. Finally, Gable nodded, as if deciding something. "Very well. If you do see her, send word to the sheriff. She cannot have gone far. She is delicate." The word sounded like a threat. "Gup," Luke said to the mules. He flicked the reins, and the wagon lurched forward. He did not look back. He did not look at Brody or Gable or the man with the gun. He just drove, north, out of Garrison, toward the high, empty lonesome that was his only refuge. Eli sat beside him, clutching a small, whittled piece of wood Luke had made him. A little soldier. He was quiet for the first mile. "Is she a thief, Pa?" Eli finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. "She was hungry," Luke replied. "Is Mr. Gable her PA?" "No," Luke said. The word was harder this time. "Are they going to find her?" Luke looked at the rising mountains, already white at the peaks. "They won't look north, not with this wind. They'll think she's holed up in a barn or trying for the next town south." He urged the mules on. The town vanished behind them. Now there was just the wind, the wagon, and the secret huddled beneath the canvas. It was full dark when they reached the cabin, the moon a pale sliver behind fast-moving clouds. The cabin was small, built of thick logs, chinked tight against the wind. It sat in a small clearing, protected on one side by a high granite rock face. Smoke was still rising from the chimney. He had banked the fire well. He pulled the mules into the lean-to, unhitched them, and gave them feed. Eli ran inside to light the lantern, his small, practiced chore. When Luke entered the cabin, the single room glowed with warm, yellow light. Eli was adding kindling to the embers in the stone hearth. It smelled of pine, wood smoke, and the faint, lingering scent of Sarah, lavender. He went back to the wagon and pulled back the tarp. Anna was asleep, or unconscious. He wasn't sure. She was pale, her breathing shallow. He lifted her again. She was even lighter than he remembered. He carried her inside and laid her on the thick bear pelt in front of the fire, as close to the warmth as he could get her. She didn't stir. "Eli, fetch the water bucket," he said. He ladled some of the stew he'd left simmering on the hob into a tin cup. It was thin, mostly broth and a few beans, but it was hot. He knelt beside her. "Anna," he touched her shoulder. She woke with a violent gasp, her hands flying up to shield her face. "No, don't." "Easy," Luke said, his voice low and steady. "You're safe. You're at my cabin. No one's here but me and my boy." Her eyes focused on him, wide and wild. She saw the fire, the cabin walls, the small boy watching her. "Where?" "North of town. Now drink this." He held the cup to her lips. She looked at the stew, then at him. He saw the trust fighting the terror. The terror was winning. "It's just stew," he said. "It's safe." She drank, slowly at first, then faster, gripping the cup with her own trembling hands. He refilled it twice. The color started to come back to her face. When she was done, she sagged against the floor, the shaking easing. Luke stood. He went to the large wooden chest at the foot of his bed. He opened it. The smell of lavender and cedar washed out. He reached inside and pulled out a thick, dark blue wool shawl. It was heavy and soft. Sarah had loved it. He walked back to Anna and unfolded it. He gently draped it over her, covering the torn, filthy wedding dress. The shawl enveloped her small frame. She clutched it, her fingers burying themselves in the soft wool. She looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears. But they were not the tears of panic he'd seen in the church. It was something else, a terrible, broken gratitude. "Rest," he said, turning away. He put Eli to bed in his small cot, pulling the quilts up to his chin. The boy was asleep in an instant, the wooden soldier still clutched in his hand. Luke did not go to his own bed. He pulled his chair closer to the fire, took down his rifle from the pegs on the wall, and began to clean it. He was not a man who trusted easily. He did not trust the weather. He did not trust the town. And he did not trust the quiet. Gable's face was still in his mind. Payment, property. The fire crackled. The wind howled outside. A high, lonely sound. From the pallet on the floor, Anna slept. But it was not a peaceful sleep. Hours later, long after the moon had set, she began to twist. She moaned, a low, frightened sound. "No," she whispered, her voice thick with sleep. "Not the ropes. Please, get off." Her hands clawed at the shawl, as if trying to pull something away from her neck. "The preacher, he said it was God's will. He lied, she cried out then, a sharp, broken sound that cut through the noise of the wind. Eli stirred in his cot, murmuring. Luke set the rifle down and stood. He walked over and looked down at her. Her face was slick with sweat, her features contorted in a rictus of pure terror. She was seeing them, the men she fled, the preacher who lied, the hands that held her. His own hand, calloused and rough, lifted. He wanted to smooth the matted hair from her face, to offer some small, physical comfort, to tell her she was safe. But he couldn't. He was not that man. He had not been that man for a long time. To touch her felt like a lie or a betrayal of the woman who had owned that shawl, and a betrayal of this girl, who had seen too much of what men's hands could do. His hand clenched into a fist, and he dropped it to his side. He stood there, a silent guardian, watching her fight her demons in the firelight. He did not touch her. He just watched, his face a hard, unreadable mask, as the first flakes of snow began to hiss against the cabin's single window. For 3 days, the snow fell. It did not drift. It came down in a solid, silent sheet, a curtain of white that erased the world. The mountains vanished. The trees became soft, round shapes. The wind, which had howled, softened to a constant, high-pitched whisper, the sound of a world being buried. Inside the cabin, there was warmth, the smell of wood smoke, and the simmering scent of bean soup. Anna spent those first 3 days in a haze of sleep and broth. She would wake on the bearskin pelt, the fire hot on her face, and find a tin cup of stew waiting on the hearth. She would drink it, her hands shaking, and fall back asleep before Luke or Eli returned from their chores. The blue wool shawl was her new skin. She clutched it, breathing in the faint, clean scent of lavender and cedar that clung to it. On the 4th day, she woke and the shaking had stopped. The deep ache in her bones had eased, and the hunger, the gnawing, animal panic, had receded. She felt weak, but she felt human. Luke was out, his axe strokes a muffled, rhythmic thump in the snowy silence. Eli sat at the small, rough-hewn table, his tongue stuck out in concentration, drawing on a piece of slate with a nub of chalk. He was drawing a wolf, its teeth sharp and triangular. Anna sat up slowly. The cabin spun for a moment, then settled. She looked at her hands. They were still raw, the fingernails broken, but the mud was gone, scrubbed clean. Luke must have washed them while she slept. The thought sent a strange, hot flush of shame and something else, something uncomfortably like gratitude. Through her, she stood, her legs unsteady, and pulled the shawl tighter. Eli looked up, his dark eyes wide and assessing. He did not smile, but he did not look afraid. "Your PA is chopping wood," Anna said. Her voice was thin, reedy. Eli nodded once, then went back to his drawing. The cabin was small, but it was orderly. A stack of firewood near the hearth, a side of bacon hanging from a rafter. The floor, though bare wood, was swept clean, but the tin plates from their morning meal were stacked by the wash basin, and a pot sat on the hob, black with soot. Anna felt a sudden, desperate need to be useful. She was a burden, a stray dog he had taken in, a dog that had brought wolves to his door. Mr. Gable's cold eyes flashed in her mind. Property. She went to the wash basin. The water in the bucket was ice cold, but she barely felt it. She found a block of harsh lye soap and began to scrub the pot. Her hands, soft from a life of uselessness, screamed in protest as the lye bit into her raw skin. She ignored it, scrubbing until the iron was clean. She washed the plates, the cups, the single fork. She stacked them neatly. When she was done, her hands were bleeding, but she felt a small, hard kernel of pride. She looked around. The kindling box was low. She put on the pair of oversized, worn boots Luke had left by the door and stepped outside. The cold was a physical blow. It stole her breath. The snow was up to her knees. A pristine, blinding white. Luke was at the far end of the lean-to, his back to her, his axe rising and falling. She found the wood pile and began gathering the small chips and splinters, stuffing them into her apron, the one she'd fashioned from a clean burlap sack. Eli came out, bundled in a coat, and started helping her. He didn't speak, but he showed her which pieces were driest, pointing with a mittened finger. They worked together in the vast silence, two small figures against the white. When Luke finally turned, his axe resting on his shoulder, he stopped. He just watched them for a moment, his face unreadable in the gray light. Anna froze, expecting him to be angry. He gave a short, curt nod. "Stoke the fire. Eli, she's cold." He turned back to his work. Days bled into a week. The snow stopped, but the cold locked it in place. A routine settled. Luke would rise in the dark, his movements quiet, and tend the animals in the lean-to. He and Eli would check snares. Anna would have the fire roaring and coffee boiled by the time they returned, their face raw with cold. She cooked. She mended. Her hands, at first a ruin of blisters and cuts, began to toughen. She scrubbed the floor with a stiff brush until her back ached. She found a rhythm in the work, a way to keep her mind from splintering. She mended Eli's torn coat, her stitches small and neat. She taught the boy how to play cat's cradle, and for the first time, she saw the shadow of a smile on his face. The silence was the hardest part. Luke rarely spoke. He would sit for hours by the fire, oiling his rifle or carving a piece of wood. He was a contained man. His grief and his strength held tight inside him, but his presence was a comfort, as solid as the granite cliffs behind the cabin. One night, while a new blizzard screamed outside, she found the courage to speak. Eli was asleep. Luke was repairing a snowshoe, his head bent, the firelight catching the gray in his dark hair. "My father," she said. Her voice was so quiet she wasn't sure he heard. He paused, the rawhide strip held taut in his hands. He didn't look up. "He likes cards," she continued, her own hands twisting in the lap of Sarah's borrowed skirt. He liked them more than he liked, well, more than anything. She told him about the men who came to their small, failed farm, the quiet, polite men in suits. She told him about the day her father wouldn't look at her, how he had just pointed to the man with the silver cane, Gable. He said I was to be his wife, that it was all arranged, the debt was paid. Luke's hands were still. "It wasn't a marriage. It was a sale. Gable, he laughed about it. He said my father was a fool, that he'd paid a high price for a piece of used land. He was taking me to Cheyenne. He said a girl with my face could fetch a fine price, that he'd get his money back tenfold." Her voice broke, but she swallowed the sob. She would not cry. "He kept me locked in a room at the inn. The preacher came. I was in that dress. The preacher knew. He knew I was a prisoner, but he He said it was God's will, that a daughter must obey her father. She was shaking again, the memory as cold as the wind. They were moving camp. They'd stopped in garrison. Gable, he was inside the saloon, making a deal. The other one, the man with the gun, he was supposed to be watching, but he was drinking. I just ran. I ran until my lungs burned. I ran into the hills. I hid under a rock for a day. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't go back. I saw the town steeple. I thought a church would be safe. She finished, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The cabin was silent, save for the wind and the crackle of the fire. Luke set the snowshoe down. He stood, his shadow looming large on the wall. Anna flinched, her body tensing. He didn't look at her. He didn't say, "I'm sorry," or "That's a terrible thing." He simply walked to the cabin door, took his heavy coat from the peg, and went outside. She heard his footsteps crunching in the snow. She sat, feeling hollowed out, stupid for having spoken. She had driven him away with her ugliness, but he returned an hour later. His beard rimed with frost. He carried his toolbox. He didn't speak to her, or even look her way. He went to the door and, in the dim lantern light, began to work. He spent 2 hours reinforcing the hinges, adding new, longer screws. He took a thick piece of cured oak he'd been saving and fashioned a new, heavy bar for the inside. He drilled the brackets deep into the log walls. When he was finished, the door was a fortress. He tested the bar, putting his shoulder to it. It didn't budge. He hung his coat back on the peg. He picked up the snowshoe and the rawhide strip, and he went back to work, as if nothing had happened. Anna watched him, her heart a tight, painful knot in her chest. He hadn't offered a single word of comfort. He had, instead, offered her a bar of oak. It was more than anyone had ever given her. The snow, however, was a relentless enemy. It fell again, and again. The drifts piled up, blocking the single window, and Luke had to dig a trench to the lean-to. They were trapped, not for a week, but for the season. The realization settled on them like the snow itself, a cold, heavy weight. It was this that finally broke Anna. She was standing by the window, peering out at the narrow slit of gray sky. When the tears came, they were not the quiet, frightened tears of before, but deep, racking sobs of guilt. "It's my fault," she wept, her hands covering her face. I've trapped you and your boy. When the thaw comes, if it ever comes, they'll be back. That man, Gable, he doesn't stop. He'll find this place. He'll hurt you. Because of me. You should have left me in that church. You should have let the sheriff take me." Luke, who had been cleaning his pistol, carefully set the pieces on a cloth. He stood, his discomfort with her tears a tangible thing. He was a man of axes and horses, not weeping women. He put a log on the fire, his back to her. "You didn't choose what happened to you," he said, his voice rough. "But I stayed," she cried. "I brought this danger to you." He turned then. His face was hard, the lines around his eyes deep in the firelight. "You didn't choose. Your father chose. Gable chose. The snow." He gestured to the window. "This is God's choice, or the land's. You just ran. Ain't no sin in running when you're in a trap." He poured a cup of coffee and held it out to her. His hand was steady. "Drink," he said. It was an order, not a request. She took it, her hands trembling. He sat back down, but not to his gun. He just sat, staring into the flames. Anna wept quietly into her cup, the hot, bitter liquid scalding her throat. "He won't find us," Luke said, his voice quiet. "Not before the thaw, and by then..." He left the sentence unfinished. That night, they sat in silence as the fire flickered. The wind howled, a vast, lonely chorus. But inside, the silence was different. It was not empty. It was shared. It was the silence of two people waiting, together, for a storm to pass. In that quiet, Anna began to see him. Before, he was a shape, a rescuer, a man of few words and sudden actions. Now, She saw the details. She saw the way he woke Eli every morning, his hand gentle on the boy's shoulder. She watched. One dawn. As he braided Eli's dark hair, the boy's hair was long, like his mother's had been, and Luke refused to cut it. His fingers, thick and calloused from the axe and reins, were impossibly clumsy. He fumbled with the strands, his brow furrowed in concentration. But he was patient. He did not pull, and Eli leaned back against his father's knee, a look of perfect, sleepy trust on his face. She saw the way he cared for his tools. He didn't just fix things, he mended them. He spent an entire evening repairing one of Eli's boots, where the sole had come loose. He stitched it with an awl and sinew, his work careful, strong. He was a man who did not believe in throwing things away. He believed in making them whole. One night, at supper, there was one biscuit left on the tin plate. It was a small, dense thing, made with the last of their baking soda. Anna was still hungry. She was always hungry. But she stared at her plate. Eli was already full, drawing on his slate. Luke looked at the biscuit. He looked at her. She saw the calculation in his eyes. He was a man who survived, who counted every calorie, every log of wood. He needed the strength, but she was still thin, her ribs sharp beneath the flannel shirt. Without a word, he pushed the plate across the table to her. "Eat," he said, "but you. Eat, you need it more." He turned back to his coffee, and the conversation was over. Anna ate the biscuit, and it felt like a sacrament. The next morning, she woke early. The fire was low. Luke and Eli were still asleep, two still mounds under their quilts. The tattered, filthy wedding dress was still in the corner where she had left it, a heap of soiled silk and terrible memories. She hated it. She hated the way it smelled, of fear and dust and Gable's cigar smoke. She went to the wash basin, splashing the frigid water on her face. When she turned back, she stopped. The dress was gone. In the corner where it had been, there was a neatly folded pile of clothes, a dark green wool skirt, worn but clean, a flannel shirt, soft with age, patterned with small, faded flowers, and a set of warm, knitted undergarments. She touched them. They were small. They would fit her. They smelled of lavender and cedar. Sarah's clothes. Her heart hammered. She looked at Luke. He was still, but she knew, suddenly, that he was awake. She pulled on her boots and went outside. The air was sharp, so cold it felt like glass in her lungs. The world was blue-gray in the pre-dawn light. A thin plume of smoke was rising from the fire pit near the woodpile, a place where Luke burned trash. She walked through the snow, her boots crunching. Luke was there, wearing his heavy coat, a long stick in his hand. He was poking at a small, smoky fire. He was burning the dress. The silk did not burn well. It sizzled and blackened, melting into foul-smelling shapes. The delicate lace shriveled, turning to black ash. He was feeding it to the fire, piece by piece, as if performing a solemn ritual. Anna stood and watched. She watched the last of her old life, the symbol of her shame and her father's betrayal, be consumed. She felt nothing, just a vast, cold emptiness. Luke poked the last piece of lace into the flames. He didn't look at her. He just stared at the fire, his face grim. It was my mother's," she whispered, though it was a lie. It had been a stranger's, bought for a debt. Luke kicked snow onto the embers, hissing and steaming. He finally turned to her. His eyes met hers in the dim light. "Didn't fit you," he said. He shouldered the stick and walked past her, back toward the cabin, leaving her alone with the smoke and the smell of burning silk. "Didn't fit you." He meant more than the size. He meant the life. He meant the lie. She went back inside. The cabin was warmer. Eli was stirring. Luke was adding logs to the hearth, his back to her. Anna walked to the corner. She slowly undressed, her back to him, shivering in the cold air. She left the old shirt she'd been wearing and the tattered petticoat on the floor. She picked up the clean, warm clothes. She dressed in the dark, the soft wool and flannel a comfort against her skin. They fit perfectly. That night, the cold was deeper than it had been. The wind found every crack in the cabin, and the fire. though piled high, seemed to offer little heat. Anna lay on her pallet, the bearskin beneath her, the wool shawl and 2 blankets on top. She was still freezing. The cold was in her bones. Luke was on his bedroll, a few feet away. He lay on his back, one arm under his head, staring at the ceiling. Eli was a quiet lump in his cot. The wind cried, a sound so human, so full of loss. It made her ache. She was so cold. But more than that, she was alone. She was adrift in this small, warm room, with this silent, decent man, and she was utterly alone. She couldn't bear it. Slowly, quietly, she edged her pallet across the rough floor. She moved it inches at a time, until it was beside his. He didn't move. He didn't speak. His breathing was low and even. She lay on her side, facing his back. She could feel the solid warmth of his body, even from a foot away. It was a wall against the cold. It wasn't enough. She was so tired of being afraid. She reached out her hand, the one that was now calloused and clean. She laid it on the floor between them, her palm up, a silent, terrified offering. He lay still for a long time. She was about to pull her hand back, shame and cold washing over her, when his own hand moved. He didn't grab her. He didn't pull her. He simply uncurled his fingers and covered her hand with his. His palm was rough, calloused, and wonderfully warm. His fingers laced through hers, a simple, firm grip. Anna closed her eyes, a single, hot tear slipping onto the bearskin. He did not move. He did not speak. He just held her hand. They lay like that, 2 shipwrecked souls clinging to a piece of driftwood, as the storm raged and the fire burned low, holding on in the vast, dark quiet. January settled, hard and deep. The world outside the cabin windows shrank to a wall of solid white, the sky a permanent, oppressive gray. Life became a small, repeated circle, defined by the 4 log walls and the steady, rhythmic sounds of survival. The days began in darkness, with the scrape of Luke's boot on the floor. He would move, a large shadow, to the hearth, and blow the embers back to life. Anna would already be stirring, her pallet now permanently beside his, though they never spoke of that first night they held hands. The touch had not been repeated. It lay between them, a dangerous, fragile thing, acknowledged by the simple fact that she did not move her bedroll back. Luke's days were a battle against the cold. His axe was the metronome of their lives. Its steady thud-thunk from the woodpile was the first sound of morning, a reassurance that they would be warm. He would come back inside, his beard thick with ice, and drink the coffee she handed him, his calloused fingers brushing hers. It was a simple, necessary movement, but it sent a jolt through Anna every time. He would nod his thanks, his eyes, dark and quiet, holding hers for just a beat too long. Anna's world was the fire, the stew pot, and the mending basket. She learned the alchemy of their meager supplies, how to make the salted bacon last, how to stretch the flour with potato water, how to make a soup from little more than dried beans and snow. She worked with a quiet, desperate focus. This work was a prayer. It was her payment for the safety he had given her. She scrubbed the floor. She re-chinked a small crack near the window with mud and straw. She sorted the beans, her hands moving, always moving. Eli was the center of their small orbit. He was their quietest, brightest part. With the world outside buried, his education fell to the one book they owned, a thick, leather-bound Bible, its cover warped by damp in its last 20 pages, the part with the revelations and the judgments torn away. In the afternoons, the blizzard light failing, Eli would sit at the table, his small finger tracing the words. "The Lord," he would read, his voice clear and high, "is my shepherd. I shall not want." Anna would stop her kneading, her hands white with flour. Luke would pause, his whetstone silent on his knife blade. They would listen, the boy's innocent voice filling the cabin with ancient, simple words. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." Anna would look at Luke in the dim light. His face was hard, his gaze fixed on the fire. She wondered if he, too, was thinking of green pastures, of a world that was not frozen, of a time before, but the quiet was not always peaceful. The cabin was small. They moved around each other, a constant, careful dance of proximity. He would reach for the woodbox at the same time she bent for the poker. His arm would brush her back. "Pardon," he would murmur, his voice a low rumble. She would flinch, a small, tight movement, before she could stop herself, and he would see. His face would close, the guilt returning, and he would retreat, putting a physical distance between them, sitting on his bedroll to fix a trap, his back to her. The tension was a living thing. It was in the long stretches of silence after Eli fell asleep. It was in the shared, hungry look at a pot of stew that was too thin. It was in the air they breathed, thick with unspoken words, with the memory of her terror and his grief, and beneath it all, something else, a low, simmering heat that had nothing to do with the hearth. Anna felt it when he watched her. She would be kneading dough, her sleeves rolled up, and she would feel his eyes on her arms. When she looked up, he would look away, his jaw tight. She felt it in herself, too, a strange, unfamiliar pull. She would watch his hands, so large and rough, as they gently untangled a knot in Eli's hair. She would watch the muscles in his back move under his flannel shirt as he hoisted a log. He was a quiet, contained man, but he was powerful, and he had been gentle with her. He had been kind. The combination was something her body had never known, and it responded with a confusing, deep-bellied warmth that frightened her. One afternoon, the temperature rose just enough for the snow to grow heavy. Luke was outside, trying to clear the roof of the lean-to, a dangerous, necessary task. Anna was inside, teaching Eli to sew a button on his coat. The work on the roof was heavy. Luke came back to the woodpile, breathing hard. He was soaked in sweat, and the wet wool of his shirt was beginning to freeze. Anna, watching from the window, saw him stop. He wrestled with the wet shirt, pulling it off over his head with a grunt. He tossed it onto a snowbank and, bare-chested, lifted the heavy axe and went back to splitting the logs he had hauled earlier. Steam rose from his shoulders in the frigid air. He worked with a controlled fury, the axe splitting the frozen pine with clean, sharp cracks. Anna's hands went still on the button. Eli had gone back to his slate. She was mesmerized. His body was lean, hard, not an ounce of softness, but it was not the strength that held her. It was the canvas of his back. It was covered in scars. They were not the clean, straight lines of a surgeon's knife. They were jagged, silvery marks, a long, puckered one that ran from his left shoulder blade down to his ribs, a starburst of keloid tissue near his kidney, a dozen smaller, angrier-looking patches. These were not the scars of war. They were the scars of brawls, of broken glass and splintered wood. She felt a cold sickness in her stomach. This was the man who had been kind. This was the man who had been gentle. Without thinking, she grabbed his dry shirt from its peg by the door. She pulled on her boots and went outside. He heard her crunching in the snow and stopped, the axe held low. He was breathing hard, his chest glistening. He did not turn to face her, perhaps sensing her gaze, perhaps already ashamed. "You'll catch your death," she said, her voice thin, barely audible. She stepped closer. He was so still. She could see the scars clearly now, some faded, some still a dull red. They looked painful. They looked like a map of a life she could not imagine. Her hand, the one holding his shirt, lifted. She did not mean to. It was an impulse, a need to connect the man she knew with the history she saw. Her fingers, chapped and rough, brushed the long, puckered scar on his shoulder. He flinched. It was a violent, total body recoil. He spun around, his face a mask of shock and a deep, raw shame. He grabbed the shirt from her hand, his eyes wide and haunted. "Don't!" he choked out. The word was a wound. He turned his back to her again, fumbling to pull the dry shirt on, his movements jerky. Anna stood, her hand still raised, frozen in the air. I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean—" He got the shirt on. He buttoned it, his back still to her. He took a long, ragged breath. The silence stretched, broken only by the drip of melting snow from the eaves. "It was after," he said, his voice flat, dead. "After?" "After Sarah. After my wife." He turned, but he wouldn't look at her. He looked at the axe, at the snow, at the gray sky. "When she died? And the baby?" Anna said nothing. She knew Sarah had died. She knew the boy had lived. She did not know there had been another baby. I broke," he said. He rubbed his face with his hand, a gesture of profound weariness. "I didn't. For a while. I took care of Eli. He was so small. But then, it was about 6 months later. The quiet, the emptiness, it ate me. I went to town. I went to the saloon." He leaned against the wood pile, as if his legs could no longer hold him. "I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for a fight. I wanted something to hurt as bad as I did, and it was easy to find." He gestured, vaguely, to his own back. "Garrison, it's a rough place if you look for it. I looked for a whole winter." He kicked at the snow. "I'd leave Eli with a neighbor. I'd go, I'd come back. Bloodied. Sometimes I'd be gone for 2 days. I drank, I fought, I broke a man's arm. That one." He touched his side. That was a bottle. A man from the rail crew. Anna listened, her heart cold. She thought of the men who had looked at him in town. Their pity mixed with distance. Now she understood the distance. It wasn't me," he whispered, his shame so thick it choked him. "It was an animal. A mean, grieving animal. And I almost lost him." "Eli," he nodded, his throat working. "The sheriff. Brody. He came out here. With the preacher. They said I was unfit. They said a man like me couldn't raise a child. They said they were going to take him. Put him in an orphanage back east." He looked at her then, his eyes a storm of old pain. "I stopped. I never went back. I never touched another drop. I never raised my hand again. But I was him. I was that man. The one who earned these—" He finished. He had given her his confession, his ugliest, most secret part. He looked destroyed, waiting for her judgment. Anna looked at his face, at the self-loathing etched there. She thought of the man who braided his son's hair, the man who gave her the last biscuit, the man who barred the door. She stepped forward, her boots sinking into the snow. She stood directly in front of him, close enough to see the frost in his eyelashes. She did not touch the scars. She did not touch him at all. She just looked him in the eye. "You're not him anymore," she said, her voice quiet but fierce. His face crumpled. He looked away, a strangled sound in his throat. He was a man drowning, and she had told him he was standing on dry land. He started, but he couldn't speak. "Go inside," she said, her voice gentle. "It's cold. I'll get the rest of the wood." He looked at her, his gaze full of a raw, broken gratitude that mirrored what she had felt for him. He nodded once, a quick, jerky motion. He picked up his axe and, without another word, walked into the cabin, leaving her alone in the sudden, ringing quiet. That night, the tension was a different thing. It was no longer a taut wire of unspoken desire. It was a fragile, trembling thing. He had shown her his weakness. She had shown him her acceptance. They were equals, in a way. Both broken, both survivors. Eli fell asleep. The blizzard returned, wrapping the cabin in a cocoon of howling wind. Luke sat on his bedroll, his back against the wall, reading the Bible. But Anna could see his eyes weren't moving. He was just staring at the page. She was on her pallet, mending one of Eli's socks. The fire was burning low, casting deep shadows. She put the sock down. She looked at him. He was hiding, his face shadowed, his shoulders slumped. He felt unclean. She knew the feeling. She moved, crawling on her hands and knees across the space between them. She sat on the floor in front of him. He tensed, his body going rigid, but he didn't look up. She looked at his hands. They were resting on the open book, large, scarred, calloused. The hand that had held hers in the dark. The hand that had pulled away from her touch. Anna leaned forward. She pressed her lips, soft and warm, to the back of his hand, right on the scarred knuckles. He ripped his hand away as if she had burned him. "Anna, no!" he rasped, his voice thick. He scrambled back, putting his shoulders against the log wall. "You can't. You don't." He was struggling, his guilt a physical, choking thing. He was the man with the scars. He was the man whose wife had died. He was the brawler. He was not a man to be kissed. Anna looked at him, at his pain, his fear of being seen, of being touched. And it broke something inside her, not her heart, her fear. She leaned closer, close enough that her breath fogged in the cold air between them. "I am so tired," she whispered, her voice shaking but clear. "I am so tired of being cold, of being hungry, of being afraid." She looked into his eyes, forcing him to see her. "I was property. I was a payment. I was a thing to be locked in a room. My body." Her voice broke, but she pushed on. "My body was a thing he was going to sell." She reached out and, very gently, touched his chest, right over his heart. He flinched, but he didn't pull away. "This," she whispered, her voice fierce. "This is the first time in my life I have ever chosen anything. I am choosing this." She pressed her fingers, just slightly, against his shirt. "Please, I want to feel something. I want to feel something that's mine." His defenses shattered. The guilt, the grief, the self-loathing. It was all washed away by the raw, desperate honesty of her plea. He saw her, not as a victim, but as a woman, as strong as he was, claiming her own ground. He leaned forward, his movement slow, agonizingly tentative. He was giving her every chance to pull away. He cupped her face in his hands, his rough palm scraping her skin. His eyes searched hers, one last silent question. She did not pull away. She leaned into his touch. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of shared pain. It was slow and aching. His lips were chapped, tasting of coffee and salt in the cold. Her lips were soft, trembling. It was a kiss of questions. Can we be whole? Can we be clean? It was a kiss of ghosts, of Sarah, of Gable, of all the people who had broken them. And for a moment, it was just them, two survivors in a storm, clinging to each other. Anna's hands came up, clutching his shirt. She kissed him back, pouring all her fear and loneliness and new, terrifying hope into it. It was Luke who broke it. He pulled back, his breath ragged. His forehead rested against hers. His eyes were squeezed shut, his face a mask of anguish. "Anna," he whispered, his voice cracking. He was shaking. "I can't. You're not ready. You're still running. You're still." He pulled away further, his hands falling from her face. He looked at her, his gaze full of a terrible, tender sadness. "And I'm not clean," he said. He stood, his movements jerky, and grabbed his coat. He went to the door, unbarred it, and stepped out into the howling blizzard, leaving her alone by the dying fire, the taste of him still on her lips, her body aching with a want that was, for the first time, entirely her own. A few days passed, the blizzard broke. Luke returned, his face rimed with ice, and they did not speak of the kiss. The tension was back, but it was sharper now, freighted with a new, shared knowledge. They avoided touching. They avoided, even, meeting each other's eyes. Life snapped back into its hard, cold routine. One morning, Anna was helping Eli with his slate. Luke was outside. The cabin was quiet. Eli had drawn a picture of the cabin, with 3 figures standing outside. A tall one, a small one, and one with long, yellow hair. He looked up at her, his dark eyes, so like his father's, suddenly serious. "Anna," he asked, his chalk pausing, "are you going to stay?" Anna's heart stopped. She looked at the small, serious face. "Stay?" "Aye," he said, using his father's word. "When the snow melts, will you stay? Forever, with me and Pa?" He asked it so simply. He was not asking about love, or danger, or the men who were hunting her. He was asking if the new, warm shape of their life, the one with regular meals, the one with mended clothes, the one where his father's shoulders were less slumped, would continue. Anna looked at the boy. She saw Luke's face in his. She thought of the kiss, of the hope that had flared in her. She thought of the man, Gable, and his cold eyes. The spring thaw was not a promise of freedom. It was a threat. It was the moment the wolves could start hunting again. Her heart broke. She could promise him nothing. To promise him forever was a lie, and to promise him no was a cruelty. She said nothing. She just reached out and pulled him off the stool and into her arms, hugging him tightly, her face buried in his dark, clean hair. She held him as if he were the only solid thing in the world, her eyes squeezed shut, the tears hot behind them. She promised him nothing, and he, in his childish wisdom, did not ask again. He just hugged her back. The world began to thaw. It was not a gentle spring, but a violent, reluctant cracking. By day, the sun had a weak, watery bite, and the snow dripped, a constant, maddening rhythm from the eaves. The cabin became an island in a sea of thick, gray mud, but by night, the cold snapped back, freezing the melt, turning the paths to treacherous glass. The wind still held the smell of ice. Spring was a threat. It was the promise of open passes. It was the sound of riders. Inside the cabin, the routine held, but it was strained, brittle. The kiss hung in the air between them, a ghost. Luke was gruff, retreating into his chores, his silence heavier than before. Anna was quiet, her movements small, her eyes often on the door. They moved around each other, two people bound by a secret they could not speak and a danger they could not escape. Their survival, once a matter of endurance, became a matter of arithmetic. Luke stood in the small, curtained-off alcove that served as their pantry. He ran his hand along the rough wood of the flour barrel. It was empty. The last of the flour had been used 3 days ago. All that remained was a half-full sack of beans, a dwindling side of bacon, and a tin of coffee. He looked at Eli, who was thin, his face pale, his eyes too large. The boy had his mother's frail constitution, and the winter had been hard on him. He could not live on beans and salt pork. "I'm going to town," Luke said. The words dropped into the cabin's silence like stones. Anna, who was scrubbing the table, froze. Her back was to him, but he saw her shoulders tighten. "No," she said. It was not a plea. It was a sharp, terrified command. "We're out of flour," he said, his voice flat. "Eli needs food." She turned, her face pale. "They'll be looking. The thaw. It's been weeks. They'll be riding. That man, Gable. He won't have stopped. He'll have men in town. He'll be asking." "Maybe," Luke conceded. He had thought of nothing else for a month. "But the passes are still high. No one's coming over the mountains. He'll think you're still in garrison, or you went south. He won't look here." "You don't know that," she whispered, her hands twisting in her apron. "You can't know that. Please, Luke, just a few more days. You can set more snares. A deer will come down." "I've seen no sign," he said, his voice hard with the truth. "The snares are empty. The deer are still high. Waiting is starving." He pulled his heaviest coat from the peg, the one he had worn that night, the one with the faint smell of brawl and whiskey still in it. "I'll ride the mule. She's faster. I'll be in garrison by nightfall. Get the flour in the morning, and be back tomorrow before dark. 2 days. 2 days, she repeated, the words hollow. "Alone. For 2 days." He saw the terror in her eyes, the memory of the church, and for a moment, he faltered. The urge to stay, to bar the door and hole up, was a physical ache, but he looked at Eli, who was watching them, his small face pinched with a worry no 8-year-old should know. His jaw hardened. "You'll be safe. The door is barred. No one knows this place." He checked his rifle, sliding cartridges into the magazine. He strapped his hunting knife to his belt. He looked like a man going to war. He went to the door. Anna. She looked at him, her eyes wide.
Bar the door after me. Don't open it. For no one. Not until you hear my whistle.
You know the one. She nodded, unable to speak.
If there's trouble.
Wolves, a stray bear. One shot. If it's men. His gaze was level, deadly serious. 2 shots, and you take Eli. You go out the trap door in the floor, into the root cellar. You follow the tunnel. It comes out in the rocks, behind the lean-to. You run. You don't stop. You understand?
Yes,
she whispered. He touched Eli's hair. A brief, rough caress. He looked at Anna one last time, his eyes lingering on her mouth. He wanted to say something, to tell her to be safe, to tell her that the kiss, but he couldn't. He was not a man for words. He just nodded, curtly, and stepped out into the gray, melting world. Anna slammed the door. She dropped the heavy oak bar into its brackets. The sound was final, a hollow thud. She and Eli were alone. The first day was a lesson in silence. The cabin, once a noisy, cramped refuge, felt vast and empty. The drip, drip, drip of the melting snow was the only sound, a clock ticking down. Anna tried to keep busy. She made a thin bean soup for lunch. She scrubbed the hearth, a job she despised. She tried to keep the ghosts at bay. She sat with Eli at the table, the light from the single window thin and gray. Your PA? She started, then stopped. He'll be fine. Eli just nodded, his gaze on the door. Let's fix those trousers, she said, her voice too bright. The ones you ripped by the woodpile. She fetched her mending basket. It was one of Sarah's, a small willow thing, and she felt a pang, as she always did, when she used it. She showed Eli how to thread the needle, how to pull the thread tight, how to make a small, strong stitch to close the hole. Pa just uses sinew, Eli said, his small fingers fumbling with the cloth. He says it's stronger.
This is neater,
Anna said, guiding his hand. It will keep the cold wind out better. There, see? He made a few crooked, earnest stitches. The work was small, focused. It kept their hands busy. It kept their eyes down. But the silence pressed in. Anna? Eli asked, his voice small. Yes, Eli. Tell me a story. She looked at his worried face. He needed to be somewhere else. She needed to be somewhere else.
A story, she said, her needle pausing. All right, once upon a time, in a land very far away, there was a cabin, a magic cabin, and it sat in a deep wood, and it was safe. No one could find it, unless they were good, and inside there lived a little boy. She spun a tale, her voice soft, the words coming from some place of deep, childish longing. She told him about a boy who could talk to the squirrels, about a magic spring that never froze, about a pantry that was always full of honey cakes. She spoke of green fields and warm sun, a world without snow, without fear. Eli listened, his head resting on his hand, his eyes growing sleepy. The fear drained from his face, replaced by a soft, childish peace. Anna's voice, too, lost its strained edge. In the telling, for a little while. She was safe, too. He fell asleep at the table, his head on his arms. Anna smiled, a small, sad smile, and carried him to his cot, tucking the quilts around him. She sat in Luke's chair by the fire, the rifle across her lap. The light in the cabin began to fail. The shadows in the corners grew long, then merged. She did not light the lamp. She just sat and listened. She heard it in the late afternoon. The drip had almost stopped as the temperature fell. The woods were in a deep, frozen hush. Then, thud, 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 thud. It was not a deer. It was not a mule. It was the heavy, rhythmic sound of shod horses, moving with purpose. More than one. Anna's blood turned to ice. She went to the window, peering through a small crack. She saw nothing but the darkening trees, the gray, dirty snow. But the sound was closer now. They were not on the path.
They were in the trees, north of the cabin, moving in a line, scouting. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it would break her ribs. They passed. The sound faded. She ran to Eli. He was still asleep. She shook him, her hand over his mouth. "Eli, wake up! Wake up! Now!" He woke, his eyes wide and terrified at her expression. "You must be quiet," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Quieter than a mouse. Do you understand?" He nodded, his body trembling. "Get in the woodbox. Now! Go!" "Is it Pa?" he whispered. "No, it's not Pa. Go! Get in! All the way to the back!" She pulled him to the large, deep box by the hearth. She shoved him inside, behind the stacks of split logs. "Get down!" she commanded. She piled the loose blankets from her own pallet on top of him, then covered them with smaller pieces of kindling. "Do not move. Do not make a sound. No matter what you hear, do you promise me?" "I promise." His small, muffled voice came back. Anna took a deep breath. She grabbed the rifle. She went to the door, her back pressed against the wall beside it, and she waited. The sun set. The cabin plunged into a thick, cold darkness, lit only by the faint, red glow of the embers in the hearth. Hours passed. She did not move. Her legs ached. She was so cold she had begun to shiver. She must have imagined it. They rode past. They were gone. Then, a footstep crunched on the frozen snow. Right outside the door, a heavy bang, bang, bang hammered the wood, making the oak bar jump. "Anna!" The voice was not Luke's. It was smooth, educated, oily. The voice from her nightmares. The voice she had last heard in garrison. "We know you are in there, my dear. We saw the smoke. It has been a long winter." It was Gable. Anna pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a scream. Another voice. This one rougher, angrier. "Open the door, you thieving whore. The boss wants to see you." "Patience. Jed." Gable's voice cooed. "She is just frightened. Open the door." "Anna, we have come for what was stolen. We have come for you. Cooperate, and we will be lenient." Anna's mind raced. He said Jed, the man with the rifle. There were two of them. "Go away!" she screamed, her voice high and thin. "Leave us alone! There's nothing here for you!" There was a short, dry laugh from outside. "Oh, but there is, my dear. You are here. Open the door." "No." "Very well." Gable's voice lost all its false warmth. It turned to ice. "Jed, the door!" A heavy, muffled thud struck the door. A shoulder, the oak bar held. Anna scrambled, pressing her back against the bar, adding her small weight to it, her eyes squeezed shut. "Go away." Crash! The door slammed into her back, knocking the breath from her. The wood groaned. "It's barred. Boss!" The rough voice grunted. "Then break it, you fool! Crash!" A splintering sound. The top bracket ripped loose from the wall. Crash! The entire door exploded inward, the oak bar flying across the room. Anna was thrown to the floor, the rifle skittering away into the darkness. Two figures filled the doorway, black shapes against the snow. One was large. Jed, the other, slighter, held up a lantern. The light filled the cabin, blinding her. It was Gable. He was dressed in his fine black coat, his face red from the cold, his eyes glittering. "There you are," he sneered, stepping inside. "My runaway bride. You have been a great deal of trouble. A terrible investment." Jed, a huge, bearded man, pushed past him, his rifle held ready. "Where's the man? The one from the wagon?" "He is not here, clearly," Gable said, his gaze sweeping the empty cabin. "She has been playing house." He looked down at Anna, who was scrambling backward on the floor. He saw the flannel shirt, the wool skirt. "Dressed like his dead wife, are we? How cozy." He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her to her feet. "You will pay for this, Anna, for the cold, for the chase, for my time. Please," she sobbed. "Just let me go. I have nothing." "Search the cabin, Jed," Gable ordered, his grip tightening in her hair. "He must have money, furs, something. He will pay me for her keep this winter." Jed grunted. "My pleasure." He slammed the butt of his rifle onto the small table, splitting the wood. He kicked over Eli's stool. He began to ransack the place, ripping the blankets from Luke's bed, then from Eli's cot. "Nothing, boss," he grumbled. He was moving toward the hearth, toward the wood box. Anna's heart stopped. "No!" she screamed, and she threw herself at Gable, her nails raking for his face. He roared, shoving her hard. She fell, her head striking the stone hearth. The room swam. "Insolent!" Gable hissed. Jed was at the wood box. "What's this?" He kicked at the logs. "No!" Anna tried to stand. And then a new shadow filled the broken doorway. It was not a man, it was a fury. It was Luke. He was covered in snow, his face a mask of terrible, cold rage. He had no rifle. He held his axe. For one breathless second, everyone was frozen. Gable, his eyes wide, Jed, turning from the wood box. "Let her go," Luke said. His voice was not a voice. It was the sound of rock slide. Gable, startled, shoved Anna away from him and fumbled inside his coat for his pistol. "Jed, kill him!" Jed was fast. He raised his rifle, but Luke was faster. He had lived this moment in his nightmares for 3 months. He did not hesitate. He did not shout. He took one long stride and swung the axe. It was not a wood-chopping swing. It was a low, horizontal arc of whistling iron. Jed tried to block it with the rifle. The axe blade sheared through the rifle's wooden stock as if it were a twig and bit deep into the man's chest. There was a terrible, wet thunk. Jed looked down at the axe head buried in his own body. He looked up at Luke, his eyes full of a strange, final surprise. He made a small, choking sound, and he fell, dead. Gable screamed. It was a high, thin, reedy sound. He had his pistol out. He fired, the shot deafening in the small cabin. The bullet tore through the sleeve of Luke's coat, stinging his arm. Gable was not a fighter. He was a creature of contracts and threats. Seeing his man dead, seeing Luke advancing, he panicked. He turned and bolted, scrambling through the broken door. Luke was on him. He tackled him in the snow-filled mud outside the doorway. Anna, her head ringing, crawled to the door. She saw it all in the flickering lantern light. Luke was on top of Gable. The brawler, the animal, his fist, huge and calloused, rose and fell. Thud, thud, thud. The sound of a man being beaten, of bone on flesh. Gable wasn't fighting back. He was just a shape, limp in the snow. "Pa! Stop! Pa!" Eli was climbing out of the wood box. His small, terrified face was white. Luke's raised fist froze. He looked at his own bloody knuckles. He looked at the ruined, pulped thing that was Gable's face. The red rage drained from his eyes, replaced by a dazed horror. He scrambled off the man. He was still breathing, a low, wet moan. Luke grabbed Gable by his fine coat, hauling him up. Gable, weeping, his arm hanging at a strange angle, his face a mask of blood. "Ride," Luke snarled, his voice a low growl. "You ride. You tell no one. You ever come back. I'll bury you next to him. Now. Ride." Gable, sobbing in pain and terror, clawed his way to his horse. He fumbled into the saddle and spurred the animal, fleeing into the darkness. A wounded, broken man. Silence fell. The wind, the drip of water, the ragged breathing of 3 people. Luke stumbled back into the cabin, his arm bleeding where the bullet had grazed him. The dead man, Jed, lay in a pool of dark, spreading blood. The cabin was destroyed. Eli was frozen, staring at the body. Anna was on the floor, by the hearth, and she began to sob. Not a small, quiet weeping, but a deep, tearing, animal sound. The sound of a soul breaking. She crawled to Luke, her body shaking apart. She clutched his legs, her face buried in his dirty trousers. "I'm sorry." She wept, the words muffled. "I'm sorry. I should have never come. I brought death. Oh God, Luke, I'm sorry." Luke stood rigid, his hand, still bloody, hovering over her head. He was bleeding.
His son was watching. A dead man was at his feet. He looked at Eli, and at the wood box. He looked at the ransacked cabin, at the mess Jed had made, and he understood. He touched her hair, his hand gentle. Anna. She looked up, her face a ruin of tears and soot. "You saved us," he said, his voice thick. "What?" she whispered, not understanding. He nodded, his gaze moving to the wood box. "Eli, you saved him. You hid him." His voice cracked. If I hadn't come, if he'd found him." He couldn't finish the thought. He looked back at her. "You saved him. Anna, you saved us more than you know." He reached down with his good arm and pulled her to her feet. He held her. He pulled Eli in, his other hand on the boy's head, pressing his face into his side so he could not see the body. The three of them stood, a broken, bloody, and breathing family, clinging to each other in the wreckage. The next morning dawned, gray and cold. The cabin was a slaughterhouse. "Eli," Luke said, his voice raw, "go to the lean-to. Feed the mule. Brush her down. Do not come back until I call for you." Eli, his eyes hollow, nodded and fled. Luke and Anna were alone with the dead. They did not speak. The horror was too large for words. Luke took the dead man by the boots and dragged him outside. The body left a long, dark smear on the floor. He took the pickaxe and the shovel. The ground near the rock face was the softest. He began to dig. Inside, Anna cleaned. She poured boiling water on the floor, scrubbing at the deep, dark stain with the harsh lye soap. She righted the table. She stacked the broken pieces of the chair, the blankets. Jed had thrown them on the floor, and they were soaked. They were unsalvageable. She carried them, her arms aching, out to the fire pit. Luke was finishing. He did not say a prayer. He just pushed the last of the dirt and rocks onto the mound. It was an ugly, fresh wound in the earth. He came to where she stood. She was just staring at the blankets, her eyes empty. She was somewhere else, somewhere far away. He took the blankets from her arms and laid them on the cold ashes. He used kerosene. The fire flared up with a whoosh, the smell of burning wool and old blood acrid in the cold air. They stood, side by side, watching it burn. Luke looked at her. Her face was hollow, her skin the color of ash. She was broken. He had saved her from Gable, but he was not sure he had saved her. He had to. "Anna," he said, his voice quiet. She didn't move. "You're not a burden." She flinched, a small, violent tremor, but her gaze stayed on the fire. He stepped in front of her, blocking her view, forcing her to see him. His arm was bandaged with a strip of flannel. His face was bruised. He looked, again, like the brawler he had confessed to be. "You're not a debt," he said, his voice rough. "You're not property. You are not a burden." She looked at him, her eyes slowly focusing, seeing him. "Your family," he said. The words came out, hard-won, absolute. "If you want it." He was offering her the choice he had been denied, the choice she had been denied. It was all he had to give. A single tear traced a clean path through the soot on her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She couldn't speak. She just looked at him, her broken gaze filled with a desperate, dawning light. She nodded. It was a small, convulsive movement. A promise, a plea, and an acceptance. All in one. Luke nodded back. It was settled. He turned from the fire and put his good arm around her shoulders. He called for Eli. The boy came running, and Luke pulled him against his other side. They walked, the three of them, away from the smoke, and back into the broken, quiet cabin to rebuild. The new door was a temporary, ugly thing, made of raw planks pulled from the lean-to. It did not fit well. It let the wind in, but it was solid, and it held the bar. The cabin was clean. The blood was gone, scrubbed from the floorboards until Anna's hands were raw, but the stain remained, a dark shadow on the wood, and the cabin felt haunted. The grave outside was a low, ugly mound of rocks and frozen mud, a constant reminder. They were in a state of quiet, suspended terror. The act was done. The consequences were coming.
they were, once again, out of flour. The trip to town, so violently interrupted, was no longer a choice. It was a necessity. Eli was pale, his small body thin under his flannel shirt. Luke prepared the mule, his movements stiff. His arm, where the bullet had grazed him, was healing. But his shoulder ached, this time. Anna did not protest. The fear of the marshal was a distant, abstract thing. The hunger in her belly, and the gaunt look on Eli's face, was real. "I will be back by dark," he said. He did not tell her to bar the door. He did not need to. She and Eli watched him ride away, a lone, grim figure shrinking against the vast, dirty snow. The day was the longest of her life. She and Eli did not talk. They sat by the fire, listening. Every gust of wind was a rider. Every snap of a frozen branch was a footstep. She held the rifle, her hands slick with sweat. When she finally heard his whistle, the 3 notes piercing the twilight, she nearly collapsed with relief. She unbarred the door. He stumbled in, covered in mud and snow, his face gray. He was carrying a 50-pound sack of flour on his good shoulder. He dropped it by the hearth, the thud shaking the floor. "You were gone," she whispered, her voice accusing, terrified. "It's past dark. I had to wait," he said. He slumped onto the stool, his face in his hands. He looked like a man who had seen his own hanging. "Luke, what is it? Did you see someone?" "I saw Brody," he said, his voice muffled. Anna's blood went cold. "The sheriff?" "Aye." He looked up, his eyes hollow. "It's done. Anna, word is out. Gable. He made it to Garrison." "He's alive?" she gasped, a new, cold terror rising. "He was," Luke said. "He rode into town 3 days ago, near dead. His face was ruined. His arm, the one it was broke. He'd been in the cold a long time. He died, yesterday, in Croft's storeroom." Anna felt a dizzying rush of relief, so strong it made her sick. He was dead. The man with the cold eyes was dead. "But then it's over," she whispered. "No," Luke said, his voice flat. "It's not. He didn't die before he talked. He raved. He told everyone. Told them about a hermit in the hills who'd ambushed him. Stole his property. That's you." He filed a claim with the justice of the peace. Claimed theft and murder. For Jed. He called him Jedediah Stone. Luke stood, his movements heavy. "Hopeless. Brody said Marshall was already on his way from Cheyenne. He's not coming to investigate. Anna, he's coming for a killer. He's coming for me." The last of her relief died. "When?" "Brody said he was riding hard. He'll be here. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe the day after. He's coming." For a long moment, the only sound was the hissing of the fire. Then Luke moved. He was not a man to wait for the storm. He turned to the pantry. He began to pack a different bag. Not with flour, but with the last of the jerky. He packed 2 of the remaining blankets. He took down Eli's small, heavy coat. His movements were too calm, too deliberate. Anna watched him, her heart sinking. "What are you doing?" she asked, though she already knew. "He's not finding you here," Luke said, his voice devoid of emotion. He was back to being the man he was, the one who survived alone. "I'm taking you and Eli, now, up to the high ridge. There's an old hunter's blind. A small cave. It's dry. You'll be safe. I'll leave you the rifle and the rest of the food." "And you?" she whispered, her hands clenched. He cinched the bag shut. "I'll wait for him. Here. You'll wait for him. I'll tell him what happened. That Jedediah broke in. That he threatened a boy. That it was self-defense. I'll take what comes." Anna stared at him. He was going to send them away. He was going to hide them like they were things, and he was going to face the gallows alone. The old, familiar rage, the rage of being powerless, choked her. "No," she said. He stopped, the bag in his hand. "Anna, this isn't a choice. This is a marshal. I will not have him find you." "No," she said again, her voice louder, shaking with a new, cold fury. She stepped in front of the door, blocking his path. You will not hide me. You will not send your son into the snow, to a cave, to wait, while you martyr yourself. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, she cried, the words tearing out of her. You are doing it again. You are hiding. You are going back to being the man who fights alone, who earns his scars, who thinks he can fix everything by breaking himself. It's to protect you, he roared, the first time he had ever raised his voice to her. It is not protection. It is leaving, she screamed back, jabbing a finger at his chest. He came for me. I was the one he attacked. I was the property. If anyone is to be punished, it is me. This is my fight. Luke, it stopped being just yours when you told me I was family. His face crumpled, the anger draining away, leaving him looking lost. Anna, they won't listen to you. And they will listen to you, she asked, her voice breaking. The hermit, the brawler, the man Sheriff Brody already tried to take a child from. They will listen to that man's confession, and they will put a rope around his neck. And what then, Luke? What happens to us? They will hang you, and they will take Eli, just like they always wanted to, and they will. They will do whatever they want with me. You, hiding us in the hills, that is not saving us. That is abandoning us to a worse fate. We face him, here, together. He stared at her, his resolve splintering. He saw the woman from the church, the one who had whispered, "Please have mercy," standing in front of him, barring his way, her eyes blazing with a fire that matched his own. She was not a victim. She was a shield. He dropped the bag. He sank onto the stool, his head in his hands. I'm not afraid of hanging," he whispered, his voice so low she could barely hear him. She came to him, kneeling on the hard, dark-stained floor. "I know," she said, her voice softening. "I'm not," he insisted, his voice cracking. He looked up, his eyes raw with a pain that had nothing to do with the marshal. "I was dead. For 2 years. After Sarah. I was a ghost. I was just walking, breathing, keeping the boy alive. But I was dead. I was just waiting for it to be over. For nothing." He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched her face. "And then you came in, and all the pieces. You fit. You filled the cracks. This place, this small, cold cabin. It wasn't empty anymore. The silence. It wasn't loud. It was just quiet." His thumb brushed her cheek. "And Eli, I heard him laugh. He was playing with you. Cat's cradle. I hadn't heard him laugh since, I don't remember." A tear tracked down his hard, angular face. "I am not afraid of dying, Anna. I am afraid of losing this. I am afraid of it going back to the way it was. I'm afraid of the emptiness. Losing him," his voice broke. "And I am terrified of losing you." He gripped her arms, his hands desperate, his confession a torrent. "I can't bear it. The thought of them taking you away, or me being gone, and you and Eli being alone. I can't bear it. That is the thing I fear. That's all." She looked at him, at this strong, broken man, who had hidden his heart so deep he had forgotten it was there. He had confessed his one true fear. Not death, but loss. She said nothing. She leaned in. She kissed his tears. She kissed his rough, chapped lips. She held his face, her small, calloused hands framing his, and she poured every ounce of her own fragile strength into him. "Then we don't leave," she whispered against his mouth. "We stay. We are a family. We told each other. Whatever that marshal says in the morning, we say it together. We tell the truth. Together." He looked at her, his gaze full of a desperate, aching love. He had told her she wasn't ready, that he wasn't clean. He saw now that it did not matter. Readiness was a luxury. Cleanliness was a myth. All that mattered was this. He leaned in, His kiss no longer tentative. It was a kiss of desperation, of a final, binding choice. It was the kiss of a man who had one night left. He kissed her with all the fear, all the loss, all the new, terrifying hope he possessed. He stood, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. He carried her the few feet to his bed, the bed he had not shared since Sarah. He laid her on the straw mattress, his eyes never leaving hers. One last, silent question. She gave him her answer. She reached up and pulled him down. They spent that night making love. It was not a night of passion, of wildness. It was slow. It was tender. It was, underneath every touch, an act of pure, agonizing desperation. It was a sealing of their pact. His hands, so rough, were impost rose, gentler than she could have imagined. He touched her as if she were a holy, fragile thing. He touched her scars. She touched his. They were erasing the past, burning it away with a new, clean fire. For her, it was a reclamation. Her body, which had been a thing of debt, a property to be traded and sold, was her own. And she was giving it. She was choosing. For him, it was a resurrection. The parts of him that had died with Sarah, the parts that had been brutalized in saloon brawls, were being called back, made whole. They clung to each other like salvation, two halves of a whole, lost thing. They moved with a shared, silent rhythm, a language of touch and breath and shared pain. In the darkness of the cabin, with the wind howling outside and the thread of a noose hanging in the morning air, they found a small, perfect, terrible peace. After, they lay tangled in the blankets. The fire burned down to red gold embers. The cabin was cold, but they were warm. Anna lay her head on his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. She had never felt so real. "I was a ghost," she whispered into the darkness. "For so long, I was just a thing that was moved and told what to do and who to be. I wasn't real." She lifted her head to look at his shadowed face. "Tonight, with you, here," her voice was thick, "you're the first thing that's ever felt real to me. Luke?" He held her tighter, his arm a band of iron. He was silent for so long she thought he might have fallen asleep, but she could feel the tension in him. "I told myself," he said, his voice a low, rough rumble. "I only stayed here for the boy, this land. It was just a place to hide from all of it, from myself. But it wasn't a life. It was just not dying." He turned, shifting his weight, his eyes finding hers in the gloom. "You," he whispered. "You and Eli. You're the first thing, the only thing, that's ever made me want to stay." He kissed her, a long, slow kiss that was a promise and a farewell, and they waited for the dawn. It came, a knife edge of gray light at the window. They were dressed. They had not slept. They sat at the table, a tin of cold coffee between them. Eli was on his cot, his eyes squeezed shut, his small body rigid with a fear he did not understand. A heavy bang, bang, bang hammered the new, makeshift door. It was not a knock. It was a summons. Luke and Anna stood. He reached for her hand, his palm rough and steady. She laced her fingers through his. Together. Luke Hale opened the door. The man on the other side was tall, his face weathered like old leather, his eyes a pale, cold blue. He wore a long duster, and pinned to it, a small, silver, 5-pointed star, a U.S. Marshal. He looked past Luke, at Anna. His gaze took in her hand, held tightly in Luke's. He saw the patched-up door, the clean-scrubbed floor, the small boy peeking from his cot. "Luke Hale?" the Marshal asked. His voice was deep, gravelly. "Aye," Luke said. "I'm Marshal Winters, from Cheyenne. I'm here about a man named Marcus Gable, and another named Jedediah Stone." Luke's hand tightened on Anna's. He stepped partly in front of her. "They came here. They broke my door. They attacked my family." He said the word. "Family," looking the Marshal in the eye. I killed one. The other rode off. Wounded. I buried the body." The Marshal nodded, slowly. his gaze moving to the mound of rocks. "So I heard." Luke and Anna exchanged a look. "Heard?" Luke asked. "Gable made it to Garrison, like I said." The marshal explained, his voice flat. "He died, infection, from the cold and that broken arm. But he told his story first, claimed you ambushed him, stole his property." His eyes flicked to Anna. "That'd be you, ma'am." "I am not his property," Anna said, her voice shaking but finding its strength. The marshal held up a gloved hand. "I know, I'm not here to arrest you. Mr. Hale." Luke stared, his mind unable to process the words. "You're not? Garrison's a town that doesn't much like strangers," Winters said, a flicker of dry humor in his eyes. "And they don't like men who trade in women. When I rode in, I was met by the preacher." "The preacher?" Anna whispered, stunned. "Aye, a Mr. Davies. Seems his conscience got the better of him. He rode out to meet me on the trail, told me the whole story. Told me he'd married you to Gable, against your will. Told me it was a debt. He said he saw Gable's man strike you, that you were a prisoner. He seemed mighty afraid of God's judgment. He set the record straight." He did?" "He did." "And Sheriff Brody, well, he backed the play. Said Gable was a known swindler, that the whole business smelled of white slavery. By the time I got to town, the official story was that a known criminal, Jedediah Stone, and his partner, Mr. Gable, had attacked a homesteader and his wife, and that the homesteader," he looked at Luke, "had defended his home." The marshal looked at the grave again. "It's a clean kill. Hale. Self-defense. The man Gable is dead. The man Stone is dead. As far as the Wyoming territory is concerned, the book is closed on this. It's over." Luke just stood there. The wind whistled through the crack in the door. He swayed, just slightly. The tension of months, the dread of this very moment, the weight of the axe, the noose, it all evaporated, leaving him hollow, light-headed. Anna had to hold him up, her hand gripping his arm. "Over," he repeated. The word was just air. "It's over," the marshal confirmed. He tipped his hat. "Ma'am, Mr. Hale." He glanced at the makeshift door. "I'd fix that properly. Winter's not quite done." He turned, his spurs ringing, and mounted his horse. He rode away. They stood in the doorway, watching him disappear into the gray morning. The world was utterly, profoundly silent. "Pa?" Eli's small voice came from behind them. Is he gone?" Luke turned, slowly. He looked dazed, stunned, as if he'd been struck. He looked at Anna, at her tear-streaked, soot-smudged, beautiful face. He looked at his son, small and brave in his cot. He didn't smile, he didn't shout, he just broke. He reached for them, pulling them both into the center of the room, his good arm and his wounded one crushing them to his chest. He held them so tightly, Anna thought her ribs might crack. His whole body was shaking, a deep, silent tremor. She buried her face in his shirt, her own sobs muffled. He rested his chin on the top of her head, his eyes squeezed shut. "It's over, Luke," she whispered, her voice thick. "It's over." He held them, unmoving, for a long time. Finally. He let out a shuddering breath, a sound like a man who had been underwater for a year and had just broken the surface. He pulled back, just enough to see them. His hands were on her shoulders, his gaze on his son. His face was raw, undone. "We go on," he said, his voice thick with tears and relief. "Together." The ice did not surrender. It broke. The world cracked open with the sound of cannon fire as the rivers, swollen with a winter's worth of snow, threw off their frozen shackles. The snow, which had been a white, suffocating blanket, turned to the gray slush, then to mud, and finally, to water. The land, scoured and silent for so long, began to breathe. First came the smell, damp earth, the sharp, clean scent of pine resin, and the sweet, cloying smell of rot. Then came the green. It was not a gentle green, but a fierce, desperate color, a yellow-green fuzz that appeared on the south-facing slopes, then deepened, almost overnight, into a rich, deep emerald. The creeks, which had been frozen veins, were now roaring, muddy arteries. Wildflowers pushed up through the mud, their colors shocking. Indian paintbrush, lupine, and small. Stubborn bluebells. The land, once a cruel white prison, had softened. It was, Anna thought, a promise. Life spilled out of the cabin. The winter had been a time of holding, of surviving. The spring was a time of doing. Anna, who had only ever known the cracked, failed earth of her father's farm, found a new purpose. On the south side of the cabin, where the sun hit first and strongest, Luke helped her turn the soil. He worked the pickaxe, breaking the rocky earth, his muscles straining, and she followed with the shovel, her hands, now calloused and strong, digging into the living dirt. It felt, she thought, like digging for treasure. She found a small, rusted tin of seeds in the back of the pantry, left over from Sarah's last, hopeful summer. Beans, squash, and hardy greens. She and Eli spent days on their knees in the warm sun, pushing the small, dry seeds into the dark, damp furrows. Eli, his face smudged with dirt, was meticulous, placing each seed with the gravity of a man planting a flag. "Will it grow, Anna?" he asked, his voice full of a child's pure, unburdened hope. "It will," she said, her own voice thick. "We'll water it. The sun will warm it. It will grow." She was not just planting food. She was planting roots. She, who had been torn from one place and was running from another, was finally putting something of her own into the earth, something that was meant to stay. Luke taught her to ride. His own horse, a tall, quiet gelding named Silas, was too much for her, so he brought the mule, Bess, from the lean-to. "She's stubborn," he said, his hands on the bridle. "But she's steady. She won't spook." Anna's first instinct was to flinch. The last time she had been on a horse, she had been a prisoner, her wrists bound to the saddle horn. Luke saw the shadow pass her face. He didn't ask. He just stood, his hand on the mule's neck, his patience a solid, physical thing. "You're not running," he said, his voice quiet. "You're riding. It's different." He put his hands on her waist. His grip was firm, impersonal, yet it sent a jolt of heat through her. He lifted her, easily, and set her on the worn leather saddle. For a moment, she was terrified. The world looked different from this high up, unsteady. "Hold the reins," he said, placing the leather strips in her hands. "Not too tight. Let her feel you. You guide. You don't force." He walked beside her, his hand on the bridle, leading her in a slow circle in the muddy clearing. He taught her how to shift her weight, how to use her heels, how to speak to the animal in a low, calm voice. "Look up, Anna," he said. "Don't look at your hands. Look where you're going." She lifted her chin. She saw the high, greening ridge, the endless, pale blue sky, the cabin tucked into the rocks. She saw Eli sitting on the porch steps, waving. She pulled the rein, gently, and Bess turned. She was doing it. She was in control. A small, breathless laugh escaped her. It was a sound she did not recognize. Luke stopped walking. He just watched her, his face unreadable, but a small, slow warmth had come into his eyes. He let go of the bridle. "You've got it," he said. She rode, her back straight, her fear replaced by a new, soaring sense of freedom. She was no longer a thing to be moved. She was the one moving. The nights, however, were still a place of ghosts. The new, physical work of the day left her body exhausted, but her mind was still a hunted thing. She would fall asleep in Luke's arms, her head on his chest, his breathing a low, steady rumble, but the dreams would come. She was in the church, the silk dress cold and damp. She was in the cabin, the door splintering. She would see Gable's face, his eyes cold, his hand grabbing her hair. Or Jed, his eyes full of that terrible, final surprise as the axe struck. She woke one night with a strangled scream, her hands at her throat, her body rigid. "Anna! Anna!" Luke's voice cut through the terror.
She was thrashing, her eyes wide and blind in the darkness. "He's here! He's in the cabin!" "No." His hands were on her shoulders, holding her steady. Not a gentle touch, but a grounding one. An anchor. "You're dreaming. Open your eyes. Look at me." She blinked, the cabin slowly coming into focus. The moonlight streamed through the small window, painting a silver square on the floor. She saw his face, his dark hair wild, his eyes full of a fierce concern. "He's dead, Anna," he said, his voice low and firm. "Gable is dead. Stone is dead. They are in the ground. They cannot touch you. I saw him." She wept, her body collapsing against him, the terror draining away, leaving her weak and shaking. "It was a shadow," he said, his arms closing around her, pulling her tight. He rocked her, his hands smoothing her hair. "You are here, in this cabin. You are Anna Hale. You are my wife, and you are safe." My wife. He had said it to the woman in town. He had said it to the marshal, but this was the first time he had said it to her, in the dark, in the quiet. It was not a claim. It was a shield, a fact. She cried, a deep, cleansing storm of tears. He held her. He did not shush her. He did not offer empty comfort. He just held her, a solid wall of warmth and strength, until the shaking stopped, and she fell back into a deep, dreamless sleep. His arms still locked around her. They began to build. The cabin, once a sufficient refuge for a man and his boy, was too small for a family. It was crowded. It was full of the ghosts of the winter, the shadow of the bloodstain still visible on the floor. "We need another room," Luke said one morning, staring at the east wall. "A place, for us, for Eli to have his own space." It was a staggering, beautiful idea. A new room. Not a repair, but an expansion. A future. He felled the trees himself, high on the ridge, selecting straight. Strong pines. He and the mule dragged them down. Anna helped. She learned to score the logs, to pack the chinking with mud and straw, her hands working beside his. They worked as a team, their movements finding a shared rhythm. He would lift, she would brace. He would cut, she would measure. Eli, given a small hammer, dutifully pounded wooden pegs into holes, his small face a mask of serious industry. It took a month of sweat, of sore muscles, of shared meals eaten in the sun, their backs against the new, raw pine smell of the rising walls. When it was done, it was a fine, solid room, with its own window, its own clean, new floor. "It needs," Anna said, standing in the middle of it, "it needs color." She found it in town. Tucked in the back of Croft's Mercantile was a small, forgotten tin of paint, a pale, chalky blue, the color of a robin's egg. Luke traded a perfectly cured beaver pelt for it. While he and Eli were out checking snares, she painted the raw, new walls. The color transformed the space. It was no longer a fortress, a shelter. It was a room. It was full of light. It was hope, made visible. When Luke returned, he stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands. He just looked, his gaze moving over the pale blue walls. He did not speak for a long time. "It's the color of the sky," he said, his voice thick. "Before the snow comes." He walked in and touched the wall, as if to prove it was real. He turned to her, his eyes full of a quiet, profound wonder. He pulled her to him, his hands smelling of pine and earth, and kissed her, a long, slow kiss of gratitude. "It's a home," he whispered. The real test came in July. The garden was thriving. The new room was finished. They were, for the first time, a family with no immediate threat. They needed supplies, salt, sugar, new boots for Eli. They had to go to town. Anna felt the old, cold fear return. "Luke, must I?" "Aye," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "We go together. We are the Hales. We live here. We are not hiding. Not anymore." He hitched the mule to the wagon. He helped Anna onto the bench, then lifted Eli beside her. He took his place and flicked the reins. The town of Garrison shimmered in the heat,
It was louder, busier than she remembered. Wagons and riders crowded the street. The pitying, distant looks Luke used to get were gone. Now, people stared. They stared at Luke, the man who had killed 2 men. They stared at Anna, the property he had killed for. They saw her, sitting on the wagon bench, not in a tattered wedding dress, but in a clean calico skirt, her hair braided, her hand resting on the boy's shoulder. Some eyes were kind. Silas Croft, standing on his boardwalk, gave them a deep, respectful nod. The preacher, Mr. Davies, saw them from across the street. He flushed, a deep, guilty red, and hurried into the church. Other eyes were sharp. They were judgmental. Women, standing in a clutch outside the dress shop, stopped talking. They watched Anna, their faces hard. They whispered behind their hands. Anna felt her face burn. She wanted to shrink, to hide behind Luke. Luke, sensing it, did not look at them. He simply reached over and took her hand. His hand was large, calloused, and dry. He laced his fingers through hers and just held on, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. He held her hand in the broad, bright, judgmental daylight. She lifted her chin. She did not shrink. She sat taller. The confrontation happened in the mercantile. Anna was looking at bolts of cloth, Eli at a jar of striped candy. Luke was at the counter, negotiating with Croft over a new axe head. "Well, I never," a voice, sharp as broken glass, cut through the room. "To think we'd see her in polite company?" The store went silent. Anna turned. A woman, Mrs. Hemlock, the banker's wife, stood near the pickle barrel. She was dressed in dark, heavy silk, her face pinched in a mask of sour piety. "Shameless," Mrs. Hemlock said, her voice loud, meant for the entire room. "Coming in here, bold as brass, a whore in a stolen dress." Anna froze. The blood drained from her face. She was back in the church, back in Gable's room. A thing, property, stolen. Eli, sensing her terror, ran and grabbed her skirt. Luke did not move. He did not turn. He simply finished his business with Croft. "Wrap it up, Silas," he said, his voice level. He took the wrapped axe head. Then he turned. He was not the brawler. He was not the angry, grieving widower. He was a different man. He was calm. He walked, his boots heavy on the planks, until he stood directly in front of Mrs. Hemlock. He was not tall, but he was solid, and he seemed to cast a shadow that chilled the room. He did not raise his voice. He spoke in a low, cold, clear tone that cut deeper than any shout. "Her name," he said, "is Mrs. Hale. She is my wife." Mrs. Hemlock, suddenly faced with the man who had killed 2 men with his bare hands and an axe, faltered, her piety turning to fear. I only meant the gossip." "You will not speak her name again." Luke continued, his voice deathly calm. "She is a better woman than you will ever know. You will keep your poison to yourself." He leaned in, just an inch. "You speak again about her or my son, and we will see just who God listens to in this town." He held her gaze, his dark eyes flat and promising. "Mrs." Hemlock turned pale. She gathered her skirts and, without another word, fled the store. The silence that remained was one of shock and a new, deep respect. Luke paid Mr. Croft. He took Eli by the hand. He walked to Anna, who was trembling, her hand over her mouth. "Come, Anna," he said, his voice gentle again. "We're going home." He led his family out of the store, into the sunlight. The ride back to the cabin was quiet. Eli, sensing the shift, fell asleep, his head in Anna's lap. Anna stared at the wide, green expanse, her heart a confusion of shame, gratitude, and a love so fierce it hurt. As the cabin came into view, she turned to him, her voice a small, broken whisper. "I don't deserve you," she said. You should have a wife who isn't stained, a wife like Sarah, someone clean." Luke pulled the wagon to a stop. He sat for a long time, just looking at the reins in his hands. He thought of his scars. He thought of the brawls, the whiskey, the animal he had been. He thought of the 2 years he had been a ghost, a dead man walking. He turned to her. His face was not hard, but soft and full of a deep, abiding truth. "Then we're even," he said. He meant it. They did not go straight to the cabin. Luke led the wagon up the small hill behind it, the one that overlooked their small valley, their new room, their green, thriving garden. He took a shovel from the wagon bed, and a small, thin sapling he had bundled in burlap. "What is it?" Anna asked, climbing down. "An oak," he said. "I dug it up by the creek. They're slow to grow, but their roots are deep. They hold on." They planted it together. Luke dug the hole in the rocky soil, his muscles straining. Anna held the young tree steady, its small, green leaves trembling in the breeze. Eli, now awake, packed the dirt around its base with his small hands. When it was done, they stood back. It was a small, hopeful, fragile thing. Anna stood beside Luke, her shoulder brushing his. The air was warm, smelling of sun-baked pine and grass. "Luke," she said, her voice quiet. She was looking at the tree, not at him. I think the paint in the new room. It made me unwell for a few days. The smell." He turned, a small frown of concern on his face. "Are you sick?" "No," she said. She took a deep breath, her hand resting unconsciously on her own stomach. "No, I'm late. My time, it's been more than a month." He went utterly still. The world stopped. The breeze, the sound of the creek, the call of a hawk. It all faded. "Anna," he breathed. She turned to face him, her eyes wide, full of the same fear and wonder he had seen in the firelight. I think I am pregnant. I think I am." He did not speak. He did not smile. He did not shout. Luke Hale, the stoic, the brawler, the survivor, did something she had never seen. His face, so hard-won, so carved by grief, crumpled. He sank to his knees in the tall, green grass. He did not weep. He just broke. He knelt before her. This man who had stood up to death in judgment. He reached out, his hands trembling, and he rested his head against her stomach. He just rested it there, his body shuddering, as if he had finally, after a lifetime of walking, found a place to lay his burden. He was a man who had lost a wife and child in that sacred, bloody bed, and he was now, impossibly, being given a second chance. Anna's hands came down, tangling in his dark hair, holding him. She looked up at the endless western sky, tears streaming down her face, a gratitude so profound it was a prayer. Eli, not understanding the adult silence, but sensing the joy, let out a whoop. He grabbed a stick and ran, chasing a butterfly through the tall grass, a small, free, and happy boy. Luke slowly rose. He cupped her face, his eyes a universe of emotion. He was a man resurrected. He kissed her, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of salt and earth and a future he had never, ever believed he would have. The small oak tree stood beside them, its leaves catching the wind, its roots already beginning to take hold in the hard, unyielding, and beautiful land. Their love, hard-earned and deeply real, held steady beneath the endless western sky. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We truly hope it brought a little bit of the old world to you. We would love to know where you are listening from. So please, drop a comment and let us know. Your thoughts and feelings about Anna and Luke's journey mean the world to us. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more stories just like this one. We appreciate every single one of you.